It was a cold Monday morning when Jonathan Miller, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, stepped through the gleaming glass doors of Westbridge Enterprises. As he adjusted his cufflinks and smoothed his jacket, the receptionist at the front desk immediately glanced up, and frowned. Her eyes narrowed, scanning him from head to toe, not with the courtesy you might expect in a corporate environment, but with suspicion and disdain. Before Jonathan could even approach the desk, she snapped loudly, "You're lost. Deliveries are at the back entrance." Jonathan paused, blinking in mild surprise. He offered a polite smile and approached calmly. "Good morning. I have a meeting scheduled here," he said in a steady voice. But the receptionist crossed her arms firmly, her tone turning sharp. "Whatever you're selling, we're not interested. Please leave before I call security." And just like that, a room full of executives and assistants briefly fell silent, their eyes darting toward the confrontation. Yet nobody intervened. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, if you love real-life stories with unbelievable twists, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next, and believe me, it only gets better from here. Jonathan, remaining composed, decided not to argue. Instead, he pulled out his phone and quietly dialed a number. Within minutes, the elevator doors opened, and a man in an expensive navy suit rushed toward him, his face pale. "Mr. Miller. We've been waiting for you upstairs," he said breathlessly. The receptionist's face turned ghostly white as realization hit her like a freight train. But the damage had already been done. Jonathan was not a delivery man, a salesman, or someone lost. He was the newly appointed CEO of Westbridge Enterprises, having recently completed a billion-dollar merger that effectively placed the entire company under his leadership. Still, Jonathan chose professionalism. Without even glancing back at the stunned receptionist, he followed his associate to the executive floors. As he ascended, he quietly made mental notes. This company, he thought, was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. Upstairs, the boardroom buzzed with nervous energy. Top executives shuffled papers, avoided eye contact, and whispered among themselves. They knew who Jonathan was, and more importantly, they knew what he now had the power to do. Jonathan entered the boardroom, placing his briefcase gently on the table. Without raising his voice, he started speaking. Leadership is not just about profits. It's about culture, respect, and values. Today, I witnessed a culture problem, right at your front desk. An uncomfortable murmur rippled through the room. He continued, "Imagine how your clients, your partners, your future talents feel when they are treated with contempt. If this is how an executive is welcomed, what about everyone else?" He let the question hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. The chairman cleared his throat, clearly trying to shift the conversation to safer ground. "Mr. Miller, perhaps we can address that incident separately. For now, shall we proceed with the transition agenda?" Jonathan smiled thinly. "Oh, the transition is happening. But not the way you planned." He opened his briefcase and pulled out several thick binders. Over the past several weeks, Jonathan had conducted a quiet audit of the company. The findings were damning: discriminatory hiring practices, a toxic work environment, financial mismanagement, and a deep-rooted culture of elitism masked behind glossy marketing campaigns. And today, he was prepared to act. For those willing to embrace a new era of transparency, accountability, and respect, there will be a place in the future of this company, Jonathan said. For others, today marks your last day here. A few board members shifted uncomfortably, while others looked openly panicked. Back at the reception area, the woman who had so confidently dismissed Jonathan earlier sat frozen, staring at the elevators, dread crawling up her spine. Little did she know, her actions were not just a personal embarrassment, they were about to become the catalyst for one of the most sweeping corporate restructures the company had ever seen. Jonathan wasn't just changing leadership, he was changing the entire DNA of the organization. He spent the next several hours personally interviewing department heads, team leaders, and key employees, asking direct questions about culture, ethics, and inclusion. His method was surgical, efficient, calm, but ruthless in uncovering rot. Meanwhile, news of what had happened downstairs spread like wildfire throughout the building. Some employees, hearing about Jonathan's entrance, whispered hopefully. Others, especially those who thrived in the old system, began preparing their resumes. The receptionist, realizing her position was untenable, tried to plead her case to HR, but the reports from witnesses and the security footage made her actions undeniable. She was escorted out by the end of the day, her head down, her arrogance replaced by regret. Jonathan watched none of this with glee. In fact, there was a deep sadness behind his calm demeanor. He had seen too many promising companies rot from within, not because of poor products or services, but because they failed to treat people, all people, with dignity. As evening fell, Jonathan sat in the now mostly empty boardroom, gazing out at the city skyline. His work was just beginning. Because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about setting a standard. And Jonathan Miller intended to build something better, not just for himself, but for every overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed individual who walked through those glass doors. The following morning, Jonathan arrived early, long before most of the staff filtered in. He moved quietly through the now strangely subdued hallways, observing the environment with fresh eyes. The energy had shifted, fear mixed with a budding sense of hope hung in the air. Word of the receptionist's downfall had traveled fast, but even faster was the realization that the old rules no longer applied. Jonathan called a full staff meeting for 9 a.m. sharp. No exceptions. As employees gathered nervously in the main auditorium, whispers filled the air. Managers looked pale, assistants clutched notepads, and junior employees stared wide-eyed at the man who had effortlessly overturned the old order. When Jonathan stepped onto the stage, the room fell into complete silence. He paused, letting the tension build, before finally speaking. "I know many of you are afraid," he began, his voice calm but firm. "Change is never easy. But understand this, respect is not negotiable. Talent is not limited by background. Success is not determined by where you come from or the color of your skin." The crowd shifted, uneasy but attentive. "I was judged yesterday," Jonathan continued, "before I said a single word. Not based on my achievements, my ideas, or my vision, but based solely on how I looked. That is not just unprofessional. It's unacceptable." He scanned the crowd slowly, locking eyes with several individuals, making sure the message landed where it needed to. "And if we continue that behavior," he added, "this company will not survive in the modern world." Silence hung heavy in the room. Then, surprisingly, a young woman near the back raised her hand. Trembling slightly, she asked, "Sir, what will happen to us?" Jonathan smiled gently. "What happens next depends on you," he said. "We are building a new Westbridge, one founded on merit, respect, and opportunity. If you are ready to be part of that, you have nothing to fear. In fact, you have everything to gain." A ripple of cautious optimism passed through the crowd. For the first time in years, many employees felt seen, heard, valued. Over the next few weeks, Jonathan led the most aggressive cultural shift the company had ever seen. Departments were restructured. Training programs in diversity, equity, and inclusion were made mandatory, but not as hollow gestures, they were tied to real career advancement. Managers who clung to old prejudices found themselves replaced by those who embraced the company's new vision. Performance soared. Customers, too, noticed the difference. Westbridge's reputation began to change, not through expensive PR campaigns, but organically, as clients shared stories of renewed professionalism, innovation, and fairness. Behind it all was Jonathan, leading with a quiet strength, never raising his voice, never demanding credit, but reshaping everything with relentless consistency. One afternoon, about 2 months after he first walked through those doors, Jonathan was walking through the now bustling lobby when he noticed a young man, clearly nervous, standing near the entrance. His clothes were slightly wrinkled, his shoes scuffed. The receptionist, a new one, carefully trained under Jonathan's new policies, greeted him warmly. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" she asked with a smile. The young man stammered, "I'm here for an interview, but I think I'm in the wrong place." Jonathan approached, offering his hand. "You're exactly where you need to be," he said, his smile genuine. The young man's shoulders relaxed instantly. It was a small moment, invisible to most, but for Jonathan, it symbolized everything he had fought for. A place where people would be judged by their abilities, not their appearances. Where the door would open, not slam shut, at the first glance. He knew the journey was far from over. Prejudice didn't disappear overnight. Cultures didn't shift in a few weeks. But the seeds were planted. The roots were taking hold. And Jonathan Miller was patient. He understood that real change, the kind that matters, takes time, persistence, and unwavering faith. In board meetings, he continued to push for accountability. In hiring decisions, he demanded transparency. In every interaction, he modeled the respect and integrity he expected from others. Westbridge Enterprises, once teetering on the edge of irrelevance, found a new identity under Jonathan's leadership, not just as a successful business, but as a beacon of what modern companies could and should become. As Jonathan sat in his office one evening, looking out over the city skyline glittering in the twilight, he thought back to that first encounter at the front desk. The humiliation, the assumptions, the dismissal. And he smiled. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are born from the moments when others underestimate you the most. The story of Westbridge's rebirth wasn't just about corporate success. It was about the power of resilience, dignity, and the unshakable belief that who you are, your character, your vision, your heart, will always matter more than the biases others project onto you. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community for more incredible stories of resilience, leadership, and transformation. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment when you were underestimated? Let's talk about it. And remember, respect isn't optional, it's essential.